Hello, my name is Sanford Yoder, and in this video, I'm going to walk you through the process of getting your installation of the MMA software up and running. Before we do that, though, I would like to give you just a little bit of a history behind the reasons why this software was initially developed. In 2000, I was still living in Kansas. I'm now living in Oklahoma. But in 2000, Kansas joined Mennonite Motorist Aid, and I was asked to take care of the record keeping. And I found out pretty quickly that there were several areas of the work that could be extremely time consuming. Number one, producing proofs of insurance. Number two, calculating units to turn into the annual leveling meeting. And of course, after that, calculating the assessments after the leveling meeting and producing the assessment bills. So after I evaluated the needs, I wrote the first version of the program that you are now planning on using. In 2014, we moved to Fairland, Oklahoma, and this changed my role somewhat since I no longer take care of managing the record keeping for MMA of Kansas, but I'm still very involved in MMA as a whole as well as supporting this program. It is really helpful to be pretty familiar with how MMA works as an organization before you try to use the software. If you understand the policies and procedures of MMA as outlined in the bylaws before starting the software, you will find it much easier to go right to work. If you are not familiar with how MMA works in terms of things like what's required for membership, how unit purchases are handled and what they are for, how policies work, it would be a good idea to get and read a copy of the MMA bylaws before you begin. I've noticed over the years that if people are very familiar with how MMA works, if you've been with MMA possibly as a member for a while before becoming a rep, that's often very helpful. If you are brand new to MMA as a rep or as a member, reading the MMA bylaws and getting a good understanding of what the intentions are for MMA can generally be very helpful. The software is designed with several key purposes in mind. Number one, the intention is to simplify your record keeping as an MMA representative and to reduce the time involved in managing MMA records, since this can be extremely time consuming if you use some sort of manual system. Thirdly, it's designed to help ensure adherence to the MMA bylaws because the way the software is written really does support how MMA works. If you find yourself needing to do something that you cannot do in the software, it's a good indication that you might want to check the reasons why you're wanting to do it, because it really is designed to help provide fences where necessary and guide you as you work within MMA. Fourthly, if you are using the software, this will greatly simplify your assessment billing process at the end of the year. It has a lot of reports built in, which helps provide transparency to your local MMA group and also makes reporting to the leveling meeting much easier. Additionally, over the years, QuickBooks integration has also been developed. If you want to do your accounting in QuickBooks, that is also supported. It integrates pretty tightly with QuickBooks. There's also training for that will be available at a later time. But if you do use QuickBooks, you will find that it will make the accounting side of your work much, much easier. With that, that's a basic overview. The next thing we're going to dive into is actual training on the software. So let's get started. Okay, for this training video, the version of the MMA software that's being used is version 16.12.29. I'm assuming that your version will be fairly similar if it's newer, and everything should still be applicable. I'm also assuming that for purposes of this training that you are starting with a full clean copy of the MMA software. You have no data entered, and we're going to start from ground zero. So the first thing we need to do is under setup, we need to go to value list, and there's a couple values in here we need to change. Now what this value list option is this is a screen that allows you to enter values that you need to use on drop downs throughout the program, and this will make a little more sense later on. This record here is really just a placeholder record. You're going to want to enter your own church name. Let's wipe out your church name here. And for an example, I'm going to type in Grand Lake Mennonite as the church name, and we're going to hit the save button. And we're going to come down here, and we're going to also enter your city name. The reason for the city name is, for example, you're going to use it on member addresses primarily. So you may have multiple town names that you need to enter, depending on how wide your coverage area is. So in my case, I'm just going to put in Fairland as a town name. We're going to hit save. And there's a bunch of other values that are already in here. If you look through this, you'll see vehicle body styles, makes, and models. You can add or edit as needed, but we'll come back to this later on as well. So if you've hit the save button on the bottom of the screen, you can exit out of the form. And let's go to your organization setup next. So here we are going to put in the name of your MMA group. In our case, it's MMA of Oklahoma. And this name here is going to be used on the top of your proofs of insurance and on reports, etc. So you want to make sure that you're using your legal name for this, not necessarily the name that you might use to report into the leveling meeting. So a couple things to be aware of. I'm just going to type in some data here, 123 somewhere road. And I'm a keyboard junkie, so this is really set up to allow you to tab from one field to the next. If you find yourself repeatedly grabbing your mouse to select a field, you're probably doing something wrong. And I see that I mistyped this, so we can easily go back and hit tab. Now, here's one of these drop downs that I was talking about. So you can click on it with the mouse to drop the list down. You can also do Alt down with your keyboard. Use the Alt key plus the down arrow key. And if you don't want to do any of that, of course now I've made a selection, but you can tab into the field and just type the letter, the first letter or two of the value that you want to go to, and it will quickly navigate to that record for you. That's what the intention is here. Let me show you here on state. If I type in O, I get Ohio. I type another O, it goes to Oklahoma. So it makes data entry very quick and easy. 74354 for a zip code. I'm going to type in my phone number here, my cell number, and my email address is sanford@scw.biz, and my name is Sanford Yoder, so I would put my name in there. So we'll just hit save on here, and that's a good idea to fill this all out before you move on to the next thing. So we'll close that form. Now we've got some miscellaneous setup options that we need to take care of. So when we are creating new members, one of the things that's really nice is just to be able to set a default church, like to be able to say, this is the church that we're primarily going to be setting up for. So that will also really speed up your data entry. Same way with default city and default state. I click the drop-down list here. I'm going to type in OK, and it navigates to that record. So these defaults are all used when you are creating a new member. The default unit value is $150. You should not need to change that. Believe that has not changed since MMA started 35 plus years ago. Now, on your policies, this is something you want to look at really closely. The default policy end date, and this is an item that can be a little confusing to a lot of people at first, but you want this end date to be a date beyond the next leveling meeting. The annual leveling meeting is always the first Saturday in February. And so typically you want to plan that the first Saturday in February could be as much as a weekend of February. So you're going to go to the leveling meeting, you're going to come home, you're going to generate your assessment bills and get them out to your members. And typically it's nice to have close to a month, at least a month before the policies that they have actually expire. So that gives them some time. Gives you some time to get bills out, gives them some time to get you paid, etc., before policies actually expire and potential problems happen. So in general, a date in March is good to use. In the past, I always like to use March the 1st. Since this is actually in 2017, we are going to switch this date to 2018 for purposes of our demo. And you'll understand the importance of that date a little bit more as you create new policies and later on as you deal with assessments. Allowing custom policy ID, this is something you do not want to do unless there's a compelling reason for you to do that. The system will generate policy IDs for you automatically. There are some people who want to use multiple pieces of data in a single field as a policy ID. I generally recommend against that. You can do it if you want, but it can cause you troubles. The default deductible text here on the bottom, this is what's going to go on your policies as you create new policies. If for some reason you need to change that, you can. However, $450 is the deductible for any claim in MMA unless there's some compelling reason not to do so. You do have some leeway as a rep to deviate from that in your organization. However, you do not have the leeway to deviate from that in terms of what gets turned into the leveling meeting. So let's say you have a widow, for example, and you don't want to charge her the deductible. It's completely appropriate for your local church to pick up that deductible and pay for that deductible. It is not appropriate for you to turn in the entire claim without having the deductible removed at the annual leveling meeting. Up here on the top right, we've got some other options here. The top option is for states where you cannot write liability coverage. If you are a state with no liability, you will want to check mark this because this will change the rules that are applied when you are creating policy. If you do write liability coverage, you want to leave that unchecked. Unlock policy editing. This is a tool that is used for fixing mistakes on policies and should rarely, if ever, be used. You'll understand that a little bit more later on. Under custom member field name, there's a custom field on the member form, which you will see in a bit, and there's also a custom field on the policy form that you'll see. If you need to track things like special data for reporting to the state, for example, this is a good place to do it. You would name the field that you'll see out on the member form, and that field name will then be used on the member and policies area as well as on reports that display that data. That's all for the setup on the miscellaneous setup form. Down here in data, you really don't need to worry about this. This is just tracking things like the last time that backup was run, et cetera. It's a visual place to check to see when that happened if there's a problem. So we're done here. Let's hit save, and we're going to exit. So far we've done value list and miscellaneous. We want to go to, and we've also done organization. We also want to do proof of insurance yet. On the proof of insurance form, you want to make sure that insurance identification card is selected unless you are in Kentucky or in Pennsylvania. You may use a different layout, but most of the groups are going to be using this one called insurance identification card. And the default proof of insurance for a loss payee is the one called automobile policy declarations, otherwise known as a declarations page. You may have heard that term. If for some reason you need to edit the name that is, the title that is printed on the top of your proof of insurance, this is where you can do that. You could actually edit the name right here and type something in, delete data out, etc. We're not going to mess with that for purposes of this training video. Down here on the bottom, this is some default do's and don'ts in case of an accident that will print on your proof of insurance. Generally good to use this unless you have a good reason to edit it or change it, or possibly to put in text, for example, that might be required for compliance with your state. So just be aware that this will show up on your proof of insurance. If you've made any changes, again, hit save at the bottom, and we're going to exit out. So I'm going to assume for the moment that we're not doing QuickBooks integration just yet. That will come in a later training video. So at this point, we are basically done with the initial setup. And if you come up here under Manage and go to Members, this is where the fun really begins. So this form is a pretty busy little form, and you're going to spend probably about 95% of your time in the software will be spent on this form. Here is where you're going to create and manage members, record unit purchases, manage policies, etc. This is where the bulk of the work happens. So there's nothing on this form right now. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a member, and I'm going to walk you through creating a member, recording a unit purchase, and adding a policy, and that will wrap up this video. So click the Add New button down at the bottom of the form to add a new blank record. And before we do that, I want to point out one more thing. This little question mark button here is a help button, and it is available on most of the forms. There's actually basically a little website that's actually inside your MMA folder. And what clicking that button did is it took us to the help page for the members form. And there's a lot of details, a lot of notes in here about the members form. And of course, you can navigate this like you would any other website, just point and click. And you can browse to whatever help that you're needing. Now, one thing to be aware of, on the top left here, there's an initial section with a bunch of miscellaneous things. But if you look closely, you'll realize that the help links that you see on this web page actually mirror what is up here on the menu. Let me bring that back up. So up here on the top left, under Assessments, we have Create, Manage, and Tools. So here on Assessments, we have Create, Manage, and Tools. Same way under Manage, there is a help page for every basic form that the program has. So you may find that useful. Please do read it and familiarize yourself with it before simply calling for help. So we'll close out of that, go back to our members form, and now let's hit Add New. And when we hit Add New, a couple things happen. One of the things you'll notice is that all of these tabs get grayed out. You are now locked into Add New mode, and the cursor has automatically been placed in the first name field. So I'm simply going to start typing in my name, and I'm going to hit Tab twice and type in my last name. I'm going to put in my address, 59591 East 110 Road. And in my case, I am living in Miami, Oklahoma, not Fairland, Oklahoma. So if I type M, nothing happens because we have not entered a city yet called Miami. So here's a problem. How do we do this? We need to add another value to this list. So let's go back over here to Setup and go down to Value Lists. The Value List form is going to open up. I'm going to go here to City. I'm going to hit the Add New button, set the type to City, and I'm going to type in Miami. And I'm going to save this and exit out of this window again. Now, if you come back here, it can be a little confusing because the value is not in the list. But if you'll notice, if you mouse over, you get a little tooltip that says right-click to refresh the list. So I just right-clicked on it, and voila, there's Miami now available in the list. So Oklahoma is already set as the default state. I only need to type in 74354 as my zip code. And I don't even know what my home phone number is because I never use it. I know what my cell number is. So, for example, you could put my cell number 918-533-2369 in here as the work phone number. And I'm going to put in my email address. Email address really isn't used for much in here on member records except for possibly sending a member an email with a PDF copy of a proof of insurance. Notice that the default church is already set, Grand Lake Mennonite Church, and today's date is already in as the date that the member was activated. And typically that's okay to leave it that way. A couple things to think about. Here's where it gets just a little interesting. I'm assuming for a bit that you probably have prior data, that you may not just be a brand new MMA organization. So if you are a brand new MMA organization, and if this member truly is joining your MMA group today, then 1/17 of 17, today's date, is okay. However, let's suppose you actually have the dates recorded from old data. Maybe you're converting from a paper system or another old software system to this. You can override this by using the calendar dropdown and pick the date that you want. Maybe you know that this member has been with MMA for a long time. You don't know when they actually joined. It's not a real big deal. If you know they've been active in MMA prior to this year and you don't know what the date is, then I would simply suggest using January the 1st of the current year. That's usually a good indicator that somebody is essentially grandfathered into this software. Now, the date deactivated is the date that the member has terminated membership in MMA. If you have a member who leaves MMA and you deactivate all their policies and their units, etc., it's generally a good idea to come in here and fill in this date. Be aware that if you do not fill in this date, the system will fill in the date automatically the next time that MMA starts based on the date of the last active policy. So that the last day that any policy was active is the date that they will show as deactivated. And this is important for things like reporting to the annual leveling meeting about how many members you have. So that's why we use this date deactivated. And if a member is deactivated, they will fall off of the active filter. There's always a filter in effect on this form, and so it simply filters based on this date deactivated. If you have members who are inactive, been deactivated, you can click on the inactive filter and the list will change over here to show all of the inactive members. But for now, we're going to leave that alone. And I'm simply going to hit save. And now you're back in normal working mode. All of these tabs are unlocked again. Notice this custom one field right here. If we close the member form and we go back over to the miscellaneous setup, here's this custom member field name. Let's say you are in Arkansas. One of the things this is used for is to track the Arkansas IBAN number for the state of Arkansas. If we enter that name in here and we come back to the members form, you will see that the name now says Arkansas IBAN. So that's just to illustrate how this can work. You can use it for whatever purposes you need. Just be aware that this is a field that is specific to the current member, and you have one of these for every member that you enter, basically. So we'll leave that for now. Down here is the last date modified, and this member ID really doesn't mean anything to you. It's just helpful to me if I'm debugging an issue for a user who's having a problem. So we've got one member entered. Another thing to be aware of is, let's say that you are entering a company name rather than an individual. In those cases, leave the first name field blank and simply use the last name field for the entire company name. And you see this being noted on here as well. That will cause things to sort correctly on member lists, for example, and on reports. So that's all for that tab. Again, remember that help is available. If you want to click this help button, it will bring up the help for that form. We'll go over to the units tab next. And kind of important to record units before active policies. One of the things to be aware of is if you create a new policy and there's not enough of units available to cover that policy, you're going to get a warning about, do you want to add this number of units to cover that purchase. Generally, it makes sense to record your unit purchases first unless there's a compelling reason to do something different. So let's just do one example here. I'm just going to add one unit purchase, and I'm going to click the Add New button. And I'm going to say that I bought 5 units, and I'm just going to tab down here. And again, today's date may be valid. If you are entering historical data and you don't know the dates that this member bought all their units, you could just record one lump sum purchase as of January the 1st of the current fiscal year. If you have record of all of their individual unit purchases, it is generally wise to enter them all with the correct date so that you actually have that history right here on this form. By default, when you record a unit purchase, date paid is blank. If they paid for it immediately, or if it's already paid for, you can mark it paid. If it's not, we can delete that out, and this will show up on reports for unpaid units as well as on the dashboard. So for now, I'm going to leave it marked unpaid. If for any reason you need to add a note down here, you can do so. Generally, that's only used when transferring units in and out, and we'll do more on that later. So let's just save this record. And notice that over here on the right, on this member overview section, we now are showing that the member owns 5 units, but he has 5 units unpaid. So just a quick visual cue that you'll get as you navigate across members. There will be some things show up over here that are an alert if there's any issue that needs attention. If I mark this record paid and save it, that yellow flag goes away. Now there's 0 units unpaid and there's 5 units owned. So I'm going to go back and take that date off of there for purposes of training for now. So let's see. Seems there was a couple other things I wanted to talk about on units. The main thing to understand here is that what we are simply doing on units is we are creating a pool of units that you can use to provide coverage on policies that you're going to create. There is not a direct one-to-one relationship between a given unit and a given policy. We don't care. All we care about is how many units does the member own and how many units are they using on policies. And you should also not confuse this. This can be confusing, especially to a lot of new guys, but this should not be confused with generating assessments at the end of the year. You're not turning in the actual number of units owned or listed here on the units tab. What will be turned in is the units that were actually used on policies. So let's say a member owns 5 units, and they have no active policies for 6 months. They will not be billed for those 6 months. These units are just sitting here. These units on this tab right here do not actually generate any billing. They could have 0 policies. Maybe they go on the mission field, or they go into VF somewhere, or for whatever reason, there's a period of time where they have no active policies. It doesn't matter. You're going to leave these units right here where they're at, and they own these units, and if they come back to your MMA group, they are free to continue to use them at any time. So that's all for the units tab. And just be aware that we are still on this Sanford Yoder member. So everything we do on these other tabs is related to this member. So these units belong to Sanford Yoder. So now we're going to come over here and we're going to make a new policy. So again, we're going to come down here to the bottom. We're going to hit the plus sign to add a new record. And the VIN is the first active field. The system auto-generated our first policy ID, which is 1000, just by default. So here's where the fun really begins. I'm going to type in a VIN, and we'll talk about a few things on here. So I'm going to type in 3D7KS28G1481156. Now, I typed them in lowercase. If I tab off, it will automatically uppercase them for you. And if you want to verify the VIN, and I don't know how you find it, but you will probably have people giving you handwritten VIN numbers, and it can be a little disconcerting. You're not sure, is that a D, is it an O, is it an 8, is it a G, is it a 1, an I, etc. If you are uncertain, you can click this button to decode the VIN online. And what this does, that button simply goes out to vindecoder.net and submits the VIN for decoding. And sometimes this site is a little slow. Sometimes it's quicker than other times. But what it will do is, if the VIN is a valid VIN, it will decode the VIN for you. And that actually accomplishes 2 things. One is you can see that the VIN is actually valid. 2, you can see, is the vehicle data that you've got actually accurate as well. Now, if the VIN doesn't decode, then obviously you have an invalid VIN. And this is taking a little bit right now, so I'm going to minimize this, and we'll come back to that later. So we'll go to the year here. This is for a 2008, and I'm typing this in, and it's dropping down the list. Dodge, I'm just typing D a couple of times to get to Dodge. Again, you can hit the drop down if you want and scroll the list. I'm a keyboard junkie. I would much rather keep my hands on the keyboard and fly through this stuff. I'm going to hit the Alt-down arrow key because there are a ton of models. So in this case, I'm just going to choose RAM. I typed in RAM. Now you could type in, it's a RAM 250 or whatever you want to put in. RAM 2500, etc., whatever it is. I don't know. But that's what's in the list for now. Body style, I typed in a P for pickup truck. And here is where it gets a little interesting. In the coverage section, we're going to choose what type of policy that we are going to create. In this case, this is a vehicle policy. And because it's a vehicle policy, some rules come into play. You're required to have a minimum of 1 unit of liability on a vehicle, and you see that on the tooltip text. If you hit the drop-down list, you can choose more liability. According to the bylaws, you're required to have 1 unit. There are cases, however, where as a rep, you may look at a vehicle or the activity the vehicle is used for. Maybe it's a farm truck or something like that, or doing unusually heavy towing. You may look at it and you may say, you know what, this vehicle really does represent an unusual level of risk. You may want to add more liability to that vehicle if you feel that's appropriate. And so this does permit you to do that. In the past, we only had 1 field for units, and recently in 2016, that was switched to allowing for 2 fields so that we can define how much liability is actually on a vehicle separately from how many collision and comprehensive units are on a vehicle. So because we chose vehicle, the vehicle list of units is being provided here. So if you would have picked trailer, for example, you now are required to have a minimum of a half unit of liability. And the unit list for trailers is different from vehicles. Same is true for cargo. But in our case, we're choosing vehicle. The rules kick in. And let's say that we want $26,000 of coverage. So we're going to put 2.5 units of collision and comp on. This shows collision and comps, $26,000. Your deductible is $450. The default effective date is today. And again, that can be changed. You can override that. It doesn't matter. Whatever's appropriate for your given instance. And here's where that default expiration date comes in. If we go back over to miscellaneous setup, here's that default policy end date, 3/1 of 2018. That's being pulled in here, 3/1 of 2018. Typically, that should always be sometime next year, should be March of next year. Here's this custom field. Again, that is also on setup miscellaneous, this custom policy field name. We're not using that, but that's where it gets set up. And there's no loss payee on this. If you had a bank that had a lien on this vehicle, you would want to choose them here. You can go to contact and set up a contact, and that will show up in the list of loss payees if you need it. Again, we're ready to hit save, and notice again up here on the top, these tabs are grayed out because we are in add new mode. If we hit save, they are now enabled, and that just helps you don't ensure stepping off of a record that is in the middle of being created. Things tend to go sideways when that happens, so we want to avoid that. So now we have 1 member set up with a unit purchase, and he's got 1 active policy. This policy is using a total of 3.5 units. So if you look over here on the right, there's 3.5 units used, 5 units still unpaid, there's 5 units owned. We actually have 1.5 units available, and we have 1 active policy. And if you want to see this proof of insurance, you can now click the Preview Proof button, and this will show you what the proof of insurance card is going to look like. Pretty straightforward. This data is just what we've just entered. Down here on the bottom of the proof of insurance, a couple things to note. And up here on the top right, this is this text that we set up earlier on the proof of insurance setup screen. If you want to change that, this block over here can change by going into setup proof of insurance. Down here on the bottom, notice some of this is red text, and these different blocks of text are driven by the values that we have entered on this policy that we just created. This first block of text is on here because there is liability on this vehicle. So we are assuming that since MMA is carrying the liability on this vehicle, that this is your primary proof of insurance. Now, in cases where you are a no liability state and you have 0 liability, this block of text will read something completely different. It will say that this is not your legal proof of insurance and should not be kept in your vehicle, for example. And down here at the bottom, there's just some additional explanation to members. I cannot tell you how many times over the years that I have heard reps talk about members who had complained that they got a bill. They said, I took that off of coverage last June. Why am I getting a bill now in February? Well, MMA is a post-assessment organization, which means we're not pre-billing. You don't bill and then the member has coverage for the next year. Bills always come out after the fact. That's why, and this is maybe a good place to talk about units just a little bit. The whole purpose for units is to give MMA operating capital to work with for 1 year until you can get to the leveling meeting and all of the cost sharing can be done, the leveling process can be done, and you can generate your bills and you can recoup the funds that you have used to pay claims throughout the year. And in doing so, you were using the unit funds that have been placed on deposit with your organization. That's what units are all about. Really, it's for operating capital and for setting coverage levels and billing purposes. It's really a pretty simple, pretty slick system. So enough on that. If you have multiple policies listed here, you can also click the preview policy list and it will actually print out a list of all of the active policies that the member currently has. If you want to print the proof, you can just click the print proof button and it will bring up the print window and you can choose a printer. It will have your default printer selected and you can just print out a physical copy. One other thing I should mention on the print proof, if you want to print proofs to PDF, there is actually a cute PDF writer that you can install, and that will actually be, let me pull another window over here. If you go to your MMA folder, under the MMA folder in Windows Explorer, there is a folder called Client Install, and there will be a file in there called Cute PDF. If you want to be able to print reports, proofs of insurance, whatever, to a PDF file, you can simply run this program and install the Cute PDF Writer. And what it does is it installs a fake software printer, and you can print to this software printer, and it will prompt you for a file name. I'm just going to do it just to illustrate this. And it takes just a second. There we go. I'm just going to throw the file out here on my desktop, and I'm going to just call this Proof of Insurance for Stanford. And if we minimize this, out here it is. We can open it up, and because I have my screen size changed, it's not being happy about that for purposes of this video. But there you go. There's a PDF file. Looks just exactly like what you had on the screen. And you could print that, or you could email that to a member, for example. So we'll close out of that. We'll come back to MMA. And let's see. If you had a lost payee, you would use this button to print a different type of proof for the lost payee. That's an option that's handy as well. If you, let's see, I want to talk about this rollover policy button for just a little bit. Let's say you have a member who calls you and he wants to change coverage on a policy. In this case, this guy wants to reduce his coverage from 3.5 total units to 2 units. So if you were to click the rollover policy button, what this does is it brings up the old policy on the left side with yesterday's date as the default expiration date. Now, this is a little goofy because we made this policy effective today. But for just purposes of showing you how this works, this is a quick, easy way to expire the old policy. It copies all the values over here to the right. We could choose to apply 1 unit of collision and comp, and it has an effective date of today and expiration dates automatically pulled in again. We could apply changes and exit, and it would expire the old policy and create the new policy. Typically, we do not want to delete policies unless there really is something wrong with a policy. If you delete a policy, the member will not be billed for that policy. So it'd probably be a good idea to talk to me before you delete a policy unless you really know what you're doing. Something else that's a little unique to this form is, let's say that you have a member who has sold a vehicle to another one of your MMA members. You can actually expire the old policy for the existing member and pick a new member over here. If you have more members in the list, you can actually assign the new policy to a new member. So it makes it very easy. You're not having to deal with copying VINs down and all these different values on the vehicle. So for now, I'm just going to cancel changes because I don't want to change that. Here's the delete button. If you hit the delete button to delete a policy, you should typically only be doing that if you've made a mistake in creating a new policy and you really just want to start over. Then deleting the policy is the right thing to do. And there's some warning details on here that help explain that, so I'm not going to delete that. There's more details here on expired policies, a lot of other things in the software that we have not touched yet, but for the purposes of this video, to get you up and running, the most important thing is to be able to add a member and save it, add unit purchase records, save those, and then be able to add policies. So one more thing, let's just add another policy here. I'm going to hit the Add New button again on another policy, and we're going to try something like this. This is a 2006 BMW 325. I don't have 325 in the list. If we want to add 325 to that list, we can come over here to Value List. We can go to Vehicle Models, and I'm going to hit the Add New button. And we're going to choose Vehicle Model, and we're going to put in 325XI because that's what this is. We'll hit the Save button, close this window, come back, right-click to reload the list. 325XI is now in the list. And this is actually a station wagon, no less. And this is a vehicle policy. So we've got 1 unit of coverage. I want 1.5 units on this one. And so we're going to hit Save. Actually, just for purposes of training here, I'm going to put a total of 4 units on here. Watch what happens when I hit Save. If you notice over here on the right, I only had 1.5 units available, but I'm putting a total of 4 units on this. So this is warning you that this member doesn't own enough units to cover his policies. And if you hit OK, it will automatically create a unit purchase record for you. I'm going to hit OK, and we're going to hit Save again just to be safe. And if you come back over here to the Units tab, you'll notice that today, this member bought another 2.5 units. Because of the additional policy that he wanted to add and he didn't have units to cover. If you look closely, there's a total of 7.5 units being used. There's now 7.5 units unpaid, 7.5 units owned. So obviously you want to collect these additional units from this member as reasonably soon as possible. And when you do collect on that, you can simply mark the date paid. If you're using QuickBooks integration, this process is a little different, but again, that's training for another time. For purposes of this session, I think we're done. You should be at the place where you are comfortable with adding members, recording unit purchases, and adding policies. Typically, you want to spend quite a bit of time getting all your data in this arena first before you move on to other things. Thanks for watching. I hope this helped, and if you run into any real problems, don't hesitate to call me at 918-533-2369. Thank you.